What is up, you guys? Welcome to the Road to Recovery YouTube channel, a video series to encourage men battling porn addiction. And in today's episode, I want to do a deep dive in a Bible story that I think shares some parallels with men who are struggling with porn addiction. And this is the story of David and Bathsheba, found in the second book of Samuel, starting in chapter 11. So let's read the first verse and set the stage for this powerful story. Verse 1 reads, "And it came to pass, after the year was expired, at the time when kings go forth to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him, and all Israel. And they destroyed the children of Ammon, and besieged Rabbah. But David tarried still at Jerusalem." Right off the bat, we find some information that is important about the story of David and Bathsheba. The Bible is very direct that this time of year is a time when kings go to battle, but David did not go to battle with the rest of his men. So David was doing something that he wasn't supposed to be doing. And honestly, this is the time, the only time, when we can find ourselves turning away from God and into sin. When we're doing something that we're obviously not supposed to be doing. So the next thing that happens in this story is David, while he is at home and his troops are at battle, he sees Bathsheba and he orders his men to bring her to him, and they sleep together, and then she gets pregnant. So now David has to cover up his sin because Bathsheba is married to a man named Uriah who is out at battle. So let's pick up in this story in verse 6. "And David sent to Joab, saying, Send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah to David. And when Uriah was come unto him, David demanded of him how Joab did, and how the people did, and how the war prospered. And David said to Uriah, Go down to thy house and wash thy feet. And Uriah departed out of the king's house, and there followed him a mess of meat from the king." So we see here that David has to cover up for his sin of sleeping with this man's wife. And he comes up with some clever plan of, I'm going to give Uriah some gifts and I'm going to send him to his house to sleep with his wife. He's going to be able to relax, be away from the battle, have a good time eating, drinking, sleeping with his wife. So David thinks that this is a clever little plan and that he'll now have a cover-up story for why Bathsheba is pregnant. Everyone will assume it's her husband's child, that it's Uriah's child, and not David's child. So David really thinks this is a clever plan here. But we see later on in this story that Uriah does not go to sleep with his wife. He stays outside of David's house because he doesn't even feel comfortable with the thought of returning to his wife when the rest of his men are at battle. So we see a man of integrity right here, a man who has values and is going to stick with his values. And then David, he has to come up with several other plans to get Uriah to go back home to sleep with his wife. He even tries to get this man drunk, but this man, even while intoxicated, still clings to his values and will not return to his wife because it would be a betrayal to his men in the battlefield. And I think about how David is trying so hard to cover up his sin, and how us as porn addicts, when we act out, we have to try just as hard as David to cover up our sins. And sometimes this leads to us betraying people that we love. We hurt other people in the process by pursuing pornography. We have partaken in a sinful act, just as David partook in a sinful act. So we already have thrown all of our values out the window. But then we question the value of other people around us. And we have to come up with these lies. And we end up hurting other people. You might be confronted after acting out. Your spouse might question your integrity. And then you make them question their integrity because you lied to them. You tell them lies that you didn't do this or that. So then you are harming other people in the process, just like David is harming Uriah because of his sin. And it goes even further than this. So let's move forward into verse 14. It says, "And it came to pass in the morning that David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. And he wrote in the letter, saying, Set ye Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle, and retire ye from him, that he may be smitten and die." Oh, what a web we weave when we choose to deceive. David went from disrespecting his general by sleeping with his wife, taking him out of battle to cover up his sin, getting this man drunk, and still there was nothing he could do to get Uriah to stoop down so low to David's level. This was a man of value, and David had to kill this man. This was a man of integrity, and because of David's sin, because of the lies that he told, he had to kill this man. David tried his best. He tried to come up with his best lies, but nothing was working. He had to send Uriah into battle all alone on clearly a suicide mission, all to cover up his sin. How often does this happen to us as porn addicts, where we have to come up with lie after lie after lie, and our lies are constantly being untangled, and before we know it, we thought that we weren't hurting anyone else, but we end up hurting all of the loved ones around us because of our lives. And we see that here in this story. David, he didn't want to hurt anyone, but he just kept on lying and he just kept on hurting people. Not only was Uriah killed in battle, but countless of other soldiers, innocent men, were killed because David had to send them on this suicide mission. So let's go down to verse 27. In conclusion, it's written, "And when the morning was past, David sent and fetched her to his house, and she became his wife, and bare him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord." So we see here that David, he had to commit many more sins to cover up his original sin. And it seems like nobody knows what happened. David takes Bathsheba to be his wife at this point, but God knows what happened. Even when nobody else knows, God knows. And it says that he was displeased with David. And now there's a second part to this story which I think is interesting. A man named Nathan confronts David about his sin. And the Bible is a bit ambiguous about how Nathan knows that David did these sinful things, because David jumped through so many hoops to cover up his sin with these elaborate lies. But were these elaborate lies? If someone else knows about it? Now, we don't really know because the Bible is a bit ambiguous, like I said, but I think this is kind of funny because us as porn addicts, we think we are so clever when we come up with these lies, but we end up getting caught at the end. The lies weren't as clever as we thought they were. But even when we think no one knows about our lies, I think it's just important to remember the end of this story of David and Bathsheba, where the Lord writes that he was displeased with David, because ultimately, even if no one else knows, God knows. So there are many lessons that we can learn from the story of David and Bathsheba. And I think you guys can see some of the parallels that I tried to draw here. And ultimately, it just comes down to lying. But as a short summary, the story begins with David doing something that he shouldn't be doing. I think what we can learn from this is that sin takes place at a time before the actual sin takes place. And what I mean by this, what we can learn as porn addicts, is that when we act out to porn, that sin took place at a time before that. It takes place when we start disrespecting our boundaries, when we stop checking in with our accountability partner, when we stop caring about the images that we're looking at, whether it be softcore porn or objectifying women that we see out in public. The sin happens long before the actual act of looking at porn. And then second, David, he tries to cover up his sin by lying and lying and lying again. And ultimately, he ends up hurting many people. And it's the same thing for us. When we try to cover up a relapse, we end up hurting just as many people as David in this story. When we don't report a relapse to our accountability partner, we lack integrity in that relationship. When we don't let our wife know about our shortcomings, then we lose trust in that relationship and disrespect that connection that we have as husband and wife. And when we don't confess our sins to God, we disrespect the grace that He has given us. So I hope you guys were able to learn as much from the story of David and Bathsheba as I did. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. And consider subscribing to my YouTube channel so I can help you out on your road to recovery. Until next time.